As far as the coaches, so it's interesting, and everybody under the sun is rumored to be, in some way or another linked to this job, right? I mean, and there's sort of, for me, and I'm trying to think of the best way to frame it, but there are three different categories of coaches. And maybe you would identify it, Jared or Evan, a different way, but I'm classifying it this way. There are three different categories of coaches. Some of the names that we've heard. There's, a Chauncey Billups, Sam Cassell, Jason Kidd, Juwan Howard, that kind of coach. There's the Jay Larinaga, Jerome Allen, Scott Morrison, Kenny Atkinson, Terry Stotts, Steve Clifford, Jay Wright, who I don't think is going anywhere, that kind of coach. And then, of course, I think in another category, and not because they're less than or something stupid like that, they're just another category. Kara Lawson and Becky Hammon. Doesn't make them any less likely to get the job. They're just a different category because we've never seen a female head coach in the NBA. It hasn't happened before. Doesn't mean it won't happen. It certainly will happen at some point. Could happen now. Brian Scalabrine believes Kara Lawson will be that person for the Celtics, but it is a different category from those others. I don't know, and I'm curious what you think on this, Jared and Evan, for that matter. What are the ideal traits in your mind that Brad will be looking for in a head coach, but also that this team needs in a head coach? I have been long trumpeting, going back to many conversations on this show throughout the season of surrounding Brad, not calling for Brad's job, just surrounding him with different voices on that bench and getting, more of a Walter McCarty feel, something that Evan Turner obviously kind of has not been for this team, maybe because he's so close in age to a lot of the guys that are still on that team. But, I have advocated, not for Kidd, for a variety of reasons we can get into, and we will talk more about Jason Kidd as he's taken his name out of the possible consideration for the Blazers job, despite Damian Lillard on the record calling for his hiring, which I thought was fascinating in a whole bunch of ways.
I've never seen that before.
Yeah, me either. I mean, that was amazing. But Chauncey Billups would be a great fit. Sam Cassell, I'm sure, even though he's not tops on my list, I'm sure would be a great fit. Juwan Howard, I think would be a great fit. Obviously, a common thread here, former players, in some cases Hall of Fame caliber, who have been through the ringer, won championships, done it, just a level of respect that they command that other coaches don't, from players who can look to them and say, you've been there. We haven't. We're trying to get there. Help get us there. Help take us. Is that a top priority as this team looks to its next head coach?
I do think so. I think that's probably they want to. I mean, here's the thing: is so generally, generally when teams make person or coaching changes, they want to zig and zag across the spectrum of different style. And so, obviously, after going with Stevens, you would probably want to go with a younger. Actually, Stevens is young, so maybe you want to go with like an 80-year-old former player. I guess in that case, no, they probably want to go for a
What's
younger
Bill
player.
Russell up to?
Yeah,
Bring him back. Bring him back on the bench.
I think he's at like a combine right now or something like that. Actually, for that's some sort of NBA thing. But so I think that like someone like Jerome Allen is like the kind of coach they're going for as far as who's like on their bench. In that he's someone who the players really love, and I think a huge part of his role has been just kind of like developing that bond with the players. I'm losing my voice as I'm trying to say this.
What I've got
is in the middle of the week, which is why we're doing this today.
So yeah, so when you're talking about the different categories, I mean, I obviously because there's never been a female coach put in the top chair before. I do understand obviously why Lawson and Hammond are different category of coaches because of that element. But I think I would put them in the tier of moderately experienced assistant coaches who have been kind of rising in the interview pool ranks as potential head coaches. So I would put them in kind of the similar category of Sam Cassell, Chauncey Billups, Darvin Ham, I can't remember if Charles Lee was a player who's also on the Milwaukee bench, Ime Udoka, a lot of those other candidates who have been like popular names that I think most people probably don't know as much. Well, I'm sure people know Sam Cassell, Chauncey Billups pretty well, but Lawson and Hammond were stars in the WNBA, so they do have that coaching experience. And I think the days of players not seeing WNBA playing experience as commensurate with NBA playing experience are pretty much gone. I think that, like obviously you can talk all you want about the difference in the level of athleticism and physicality, but the strategy is pretty similar, and you have personnel in the coaching ranks and GM ranks going between those two. So I think that what a former WNBA player brings to the table as far as coaching knowledge and all that kind of stuff, I think is going to be pretty similar to what a former NBA player would bring to the table. So I really do look at them through that lens, and that it's really, the question of will they work, while a lot of people will fixate on the gender aspect of that, it's really just a matter of they're not experienced head coaches yet. Will people listen to them and respect them? And that's the same question that we ask about college coaches that are trying to make the leap, or assistants that don't have head coaching experience. So I don't really think it's that big of a difference really in how you look at them. So I think the category is really former head coaches that we've at least seen what they can do. Jason Kidd, Kenny Atkinson, Steve Clifford just came on the market. Terry Stotts just came on the market, obviously. So there are those guys. And I think, Kidd is obviously just a different one, because we saw with Dame, like Dame wanted Jason Kidd, I think mostly because of who Jason Kidd is and how great of a player he was. And while I think Jason Kidd he's proven that he's a disaster as far as fitting in with the organization, and making people not hate him is not his strength. People really don't like Jason Kidd for some reason. But he has proven his player development chops, I think, pretty well. And
Giannis
I don't think that's what
too.
Yeah, I did a whole feature where I talked to them about him turning Giannis into a point center. And Giannis was like, he was talking about Jason Kidd like he was his Sherpa up the mountain, basically. I mean, he really adored him. It might have gotten south a little bit towards the end there, but so I think the reason people don't like Jason Kidd so much is like his history with domestic abuse, and then just like him screwing over Brooklyn, or I guess they were New Jersey still, can't remember, all that kind of stuff. I think that's why people mostly hate him.
On the sidelines.
That's one of the greatest things that ever happened in NBA.
Yeah, that's
not being over so we can get a timeout call. That's just one of the greatest things I've ever seen ever.
Hey,
that makes him one of the
great
great coaches of all
strategy.
time. Yeah, that makes him one of the great coaches of all time for that.
Yeah, no doubt. And the thing with, I don't know, the former NBA coach is always obviously very attractive because someone's been in the job. But I agree with Jared in a way. Like, you have Hammond and Lawson. I know we put them in a separate category, and I get that, but like, these are two people that are very.
To be clear, not to cut you off, but I feel like I should say this just because it's 2021, but also because it's true. Nobody's ranking tiers here.
Right.
Like, nobody's saying like Hammond and Lawson are less than. We're just classifying tiers.
Right.
One is not better than another. It's just different.
Former,
like NBA assistant, successful WNBA player is a different tier than former NBA player is a different tier or classification category, whatever, than, longtime NBA coach or retread coach who never played the game, at a professional level. These are all just different categories.
Right. And I think the thing that would actually helps, because I think ultimately, I think they're going to probably pick someone that has some familiarity with who's already on the roster. Like, as much as I would love the Sam Cassell idea, a lot of people speak very highly of him. I was a player. I love his confidence and swagger, obviously, with his time with Minnesota and KG. And then obviously as he comes over to Boston and that special role that they had with PJ Brown and KG and Paul Pierce, Ray Allen, and everybody on that team. The Lawson and Hammond both have experience with some of the players. Obviously Lawson, who everybody raves about. I could have heard Scal talk about Kara Lawson and her coaching resume for like 10 minutes. I know they were kind of, obviously constricted by some time, but I wanted to hear more about how awesome Kara Lawson is at finding, small things in people's games to tweak them and give them advice here and advice in this particular regard. Like, I wanted to hear more about that. She's obviously familiar with the roster. She knows everybody here, with the exception of the guys that just got drafted. Then meanwhile, Becky Hammond's been on part of Team USA and has been working with Jalen and Jason and Kemba and Smart a little bit, and is familiar with them. That's why a guy like Jerome Allen makes a lot of sense as well, like guys that know the players in this team already, know their strengths and their weaknesses. And that's a leg up in one way. But then, you look at the other way, and you say, like the Gary Washburn, who has been, on this podcast several times, being like, the Celtics need a new mindset, new fresh set of eyes to look at this team and say, here's where we need some work, because I'm looking at this from a different perspective and looking at it from outside the Celtics organization. It can say, like, yeah, you need to do this more, and this more, and how that can be valuable. Is there a particular place, Jared, you put more emphasis on one than the other? Like, would you rather have a coach who's familiar with the players in the roster already, or someone who has a fresh perspective and can add something maybe a little bit different to this Celtics team that they have been missing over the years?
I don't think familiarity is as vital because this team is so young. So the guys that are ascending into those rotation roles are pretty early in their careers and they haven't really been fully molded yet. So I don't think that's so necessary, especially with Stevens being the GM. You already have their coach for the last 7-8 years in charge and the one teaching you the job. So I don't really think that's as vital. I don't think it's necessarily vital to bring in somebody outside of the organization either. I mean, just look at what Nick Nurse accomplished taking over for Dwayne Casey in Toronto. And I think there's been a few other cases, I can't think of off the top of my head, but there's been plenty of cases where the assistant was promoted to the head coaching job and they really thrive with it. I mean, look at what Nate McMillan just accomplished replacing Lloyd Pierce, although he wasn't there long term. He was just there for half the season. So, and I should say the Lloyd Pierce situation, that was basically where like the players are just tired of him. And so the talent was always there. They just needed a new voice to listen to so that they could actually enjoy playing basketball again. And so maybe like someone like Jerome Allen or Jay Larranaga, they can step up in there. I think Allen has more of the authority and gravitas to be the head coach than Larranaga does. I think Larranaga is a little bit more passive, and Stevens had a very passive management style. And so I think that probably Jerome seems to be a little bit more straightforward, and that may be a trait that they're looking for in their coaching staff. Because frankly, their coach needs to be able to hold players accountable, especially the top players accountable, in a way that everyone that I talked to complained that Stevens wasn't doing. The main things I was always hearing was that Stevens isn't holding his star players accountable enough, and that the back of the rotation guys are always struggling with that. Their roles are so inconsistent, and they really have trouble with that, and a lot of them get put under a lot of pressure. And so I think that new coach has to, and I do think part of that is that Brad has had such a young roster to work with in the deep rotation that it's been hard for him to trust guys enough to give them that consistency. So I think the coach is just going to have to be able to accomplish both of those things first and foremost. And I mean, I'm pretty sure Jerome would be pretty good at that. I'm pretty sure Caro would be pretty good at that based on everything I've seen of her so far. And I haven't seen a ton of the other coaches on the staff interact with the players, so I don't really know how that would work for them. But, I think that's more important than just getting somebody in who's going to have completely fresh eyes. Because, Jerome Allen could step into that job and just change everything in the way that they operate right away. I wouldn't be surprised if he did that.
Hi guys, Cedric Maxwell here. I want to take a minute to tell you about Marigold Medical. I'm used to keeping my body in great shape, but with arthritis, even the most simple everyday tasks became unbearable. As soon as I called Marigold Medical, I knew I was in good hands. No drugs, no surgery, just an experienced team of caring professionals that wanted to get me back to doing the things I love. Make the call to Marigold Medical and get back to pain-free life.